Enchanted Care Learning Center is ready to welcome your child into the classroom with a curriculum that challenges and inspires students, a daily routine that helps them thrive, plenty of time to play with friends, and most important, enhanced safety measures to keep everybody safe. Preschool is possible at Enchanted Care. Contact us today to schedule an open house appointment on Saturday, March 20th, or schedule a virtual information session. Visit enchantedcare.com to find a preschool near you.
Progressive presents The Sounds of the Old World. The year is 2019, and someone is waiting for the previews to start in a movie theater.
Hey, you want anything? Popcorn? Soda? No, nothing?
This has been The Sounds of the Old World. Brought to you by Progressive, where drivers can still switch and save like it's 2019.
Quote today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, continuing with our UFA reviews or previews, this one of the tight ends today. And joining us is Josh Reed from the 907 area code. What's the temperature in Alaska?
Let me check my phone right now. Right now in Alaska, it's about 9:30 at night, so it's about 6 degrees out there right now.
All right. Now you're in Anchorage. Anchorage, actually a pretty warm part of Alaska, right? You can go up to Nome or Point Barrow and whatnot.
Yeah, so we're not up there in like Prudhoe Bay or anything like that, where it's like it's freezing cold all the time, sub-zero temperatures. And Fairbanks, Alaska, it's the kind of place where it gets the hottest of the hot and the coldest of the cold, because they're pretty much, I mean, Anchorage is kind of in a bowl too, but we kind of have an outlet because of the inlet, whereas Fairbanks is literally surrounded by mountains. And when in summertime, it gets up to like 90-something degrees, and in the wintertime, it gets as cold as like below 40. So it's living in Fairbanks would be tough. It's about an 8-hour drive from Anchorage. And like I said, I wouldn't recommend, it's not for the faint of heart. Most definitely not this time of year.
I know some people from there, they said they have to have a special heating block for their engine just to make sure their car starts.
Oh yeah, you gotta pretty much plug in your car almost every night. One of the cars we have right now, my wife and I, it has a bad battery, and I kind of cross my fingers when I forget to plug in the car the night before, hoping I can get to work on time. Otherwise, she has to drop me off, because when the temperature drops, it really kills batteries. So you either have to have it plugged in all night or just have a really good battery.
Okay, and that's not an electric car. You have a gas car.
Yeah, it's a regular gas car, 2012 Honda Accord.
Yeah. All right, very good. Always interesting to hear that kind of stuff. But let's move on to the tight ends now. A pretty limited group, frankly, this year. So we hope to be done with this episode, not in the longest time, certainly not spend the time we did on the outside linebackers, if you listen to that one, which is right around an hour in terms of length. But who's the top guy on your list for the Ravens?
So, I mean, before we really get into that, I just kind of want to provide some context as far as people out there thinking that, we're not looking for an next Mark Andrews, okay? We're really just looking for an effective replacement for Hayden Hurst, that number 3 tight end who's a primary pass catcher, but, doesn't have to be on Mark Andrews' level. This has to be a nice compliment. And one of the guys I've been banging the table for this offseason has been Gerald Everett for the Los Angeles Rams, hopefully formerly of the Los Angeles Rams. He's really, the guy where I feel like it's right in that sweet spot, whereas he's kind of an ascending player, but not a lot of people really know about him. He was a lot of people were high on him coming out of the draft. I believe it was in 2018 or something like that, or 2017. But he's kind of flown under the radar and kind of been behind Tyler Higbee in the Rams offense, and he's been used in a similar role that Hayden Hurst was used in his last season. Second in the last season in Baltimore, and so I'd really love to see Gerald Everett come aboard. A lot of people want us to wait until the draft, but there's no guarantee you're going to find that guy in the draft, and you can find that guy prior to the draft. It's a primary need. It's really already addressed.
Okay, so Everett in 4 years with the Rams has not had really impressive catch percentages, particularly for a tight end at 62%. That would be my main obstacle to going after him. It's not like this isn't a guy who couldn't do something, but how do you look at that and really, talk about, obviously Hayden Hurst, one of the things he gave the Ravens was a tremendous hands guy. And I thought the Ravens, with the way they can spring a tight end very easily in their play action game, one thing they really want on the other end of those play action passes are very good hands. Where do you look at Everett in terms of that?
Everett, I feel like he was really underutilized with the Rams, and a lot of the times, like the way that the Rams offense kind of runs, they have like levels to their pass progressions, like first level, second level, and like pretty much Jared Goff, well, I guess now Matthew Stafford will have like each level progressions. And a lot of times Everett was like either the last guy on the pecking order, or he was the guy throwing out a block. And when he did get out into passing routes, sometimes it wasn't always the primary read. And so sometimes when you don't get that kind of the natural feel for the passing game all the time, your catching rate is not going to be reflective of what your talent actually is. I feel like he's a guy that was really underutilized with the Rams as a pass catcher, because a lot of times they line him up as fullback, and in the backfield sometimes slip them out on like little routes that you would see a U-back or an H-back run. And I just think he was kind of underutilized with Los Angeles, where I feel like he'd kind of be on the same level as a Hayden Hurst in Baltimore, but just more utilized in the passing game because it's more of a tight end centric offense.
Obviously, there's a price I'd love to have Eifert, but he wouldn't be my number one guy, not the number one guy on my list anyway. But he did play over 700 snaps last year, so he's playing very regularly for the Rams, and obviously is a guy the Ravens should consider if they want what I would consider a fairly pure receiving threat. The background is definitely not as a run or pass blocker, really, even though the Ravens will demand more of him in that area. Take me through your next guy on your list.
Next guy, recent release guy. A salary cap casualty, so won't count against the comp formula if he's signed. That's Kyle Rudolph of the formerly of the Minnesota Vikings. A guy who I kind of caught some flack for really wanting the Ravens to sign ahead of free agency. But I think he'd be a solid signing at this point in his career. Is basically his production last year was basically on par with what Hayden Hurst did in 2019 in 2019 with Hayden Hurst had 30 receptions, 349 yards. And last year, Kyle Rudolph had 28 catches and 334 yards. So it's basically identical production. And in the event that Mark Andrews did have to miss time, you got another guy right there.
Rudolph, in particular, recent years, his catch rate has improved to be in the 70s each of the last 4 years. He's actually over 80 in 2019. Playing with a good quarterback can make all the difference in that regard, or make a difference in that regard. But definitely a guy that could be sprung fairly regularly into space. He certainly has the length to run block, and he hasn't been terrible at it in his career, but I don't think that's really what he's known for.
Yeah, no, like I said, at this point in his career, is more of like a complementary pass catching threat more so than he is a run blocker. I'm not sure if the Vikings asked him to do too much of that. He's really, ever since Irv Smith was drafted back in 2019, he saw his role diminish on offense, and they were kind of split in time, and it became more of a 1A, 1B, and then by the end of it, he was more of a 1B than the 1A.
Right. Well, hopefully with Rudolph, if they did go after him, and Rudolph, by the way, there's lots of risk. He'll be 32 in November, but if they do line him up either wide or even as a fullback, as they did with Hurst, he's a guy you can get into level 2 or 3 to make a block on a run play, as opposed to making an inline block where the Ravens have other options. They have Tomlinson, they have Boyle, who are better inline blockers.
Yeah, and while last season wasn't the best indicator of it the year before, but Kyle Rudolph has been excellent in the red zone throughout his career, and he's just one season removed from a 6-touchdown season back in 2019. So he only had 1 touchdown last year. Like I said, a lot of that was from the emergence of Irv Smith in that offense. I think Irv Smith had like 5 touchdowns to his 1, and I just know, like in the red zone especially, you can't give Lamar enough targets, especially that's the area of the field where opposing teams really kind of clamp down on Mark Andrews, or try to at least. And like I said, if Miles Boykin isn't going to be that guy to step up in the red zone, I mean, he's shown the ability to do that. I'm not going to get too much into receivers here, but if you can, the more the merrier in the red zone for Lamar. The more big targets, wide catch radius, guy can go up and catch it over a guy, the better.
Yeah, I actually kind of feel differently about that in terms of the Ravens not having a traditional red zone offense, because they never run a fade route. I mean, they literally never.
I wasn't talking about a fade. I was just like, guy, go up and get it.
high ball zipper or whatever in the middle of the field. They do a little bit of that, but they really don't do very much. Most of it is Lamar reading the leverage off the line of scrimmage or Lamar moving left to right to create a passing lane of his own, including a late leak out. So I think that's the reason. That's the primary reason why Lamar has so few red zone interceptions. Obviously, you saw the first of his career against Buffalo at a very inopportune time. But I think getting big bodies for Lamar for the red zone is not the reason I do it. I do it for the play action game, and I think Rudolph can help him there. I really do. But anyway, he's on my list. I'm gonna toss out another name. One the Ravens certainly will not get is Hunter Henry, who's only 27 now. Obviously, coming to the end should get really paid off because he's the only great young tight end in this class. There's another good one, I think, but this is the only great young one.
Yeah, I've loved Hunter Henry since he came out of college, and the injuries are kind of like really kind of bogged him down from truly transcending into the upper echelon of tight ends. But he definitely has all the talent. Like I said, I feel like the Chargers are probably going to franchise tag him again. I mean, the tag for a tight end is nowhere near as high as it is for a receiver. That's basically what you get from Hunter Henry is like number 2 receiver production. So I don't think he's going to hit the market. I think they have from the time of recording this, it's March 8th, and I think the franchise tag deadline's on the 9th. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him tagged in the next 24 hours.
Okay, that'll be interesting. So that's good to get the date out there because there will be a lot of changes before free agency begins. We realize that we're going to see a bloodbath, I think we'd agree, in terms of the number of people cut over the next 2 weeks, even with some of the changes in terms of projected cap over the next few years.
I think one guy in particular that's on my list, even though he's not a free agent yet, but is expected to be one if he can't be traded before then, is Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles. Right now, he's still on the roster. I know he's not a UFA just yet, but he's another guy who I think would, if let go, is coming off a down year. We had career lows in receptions and yards, and just right around the production that you saw from Hayden Hurst in 2019. As I mentioned again, you really just need that complementary pass catching tight end to Mark Andrews. I think a guy like Zach Ertz, I'm not sure if he'd be willing to accept a lesser role. I mean, he already kind of had to deal with that in Philadelphia with Dallas Goedert. But I think the hang up with Philly and Zach Ertz was, they couldn't come to agreement on the whole contract thing. He wanted to stay there at the pay he was willing to get, but if he does end up getting cut, if he's not traded, maybe that's a reality check for him. He's like, hey, let me go somewhere, get my get back for a year, and then come hit the market again next year. So the Ravens get him on a reasonably priced 1-year deal. If he is indeed cut, I think he'd be a great fit too.
I honestly, in hearing about Ertz this year, and I know a lot of people have talked about him, and I had a guy on from Philly who was eager to get him traded at midseason, which, boy, I would be too if I were an Eagles fan, and he hadn't been hurt yet at that point. But the big number for Zach Ertz, he had 72 targets last year. So he played 11 games before he got hurt, or parts of 11 games anyway. But the big number for him is 4.7 yards per target. That is atrocious. That's worse than AJ Green. I mean, I don't have to tell you who it's worse than. It's worse than basically everybody. I can't pick up a 31-year-old player and be excited about that. He'll be 31 in November, about a guy who's starting from that point. And he'd been in decline for a couple of years prior to that, too. 6.8 yards per target in 2019, despite the fact that he had his third Pro Bowl season then.
Yeah, but I feel like some of Ertz's production, decline in efficiency was more of a product of the decline in quarterback play more so than it was indication that he's, really fallen off of a cliff. So if you look at Carson Wentz, I mean, guy just got traded, but his play over the last couple of years has really been uneasy. And then they're with their protection, the problem they've been having in Philadelphia too. A lot of their stuff has been short passing offense. So he's not a guy that can really pick up a lot of yak. So when they throw it to him, he kind of gets, catches the ball and gets tackled. So I just think the whole offensive situation they had in Philadelphia really kind of, to put a knock on his stock more so than an indication that he's really falling off of his perennial Pro Bowl status.
Well, that's fair enough. Let's hear the next person on your list, the next tight end on your list.
Another guy I like, kind of under the radar. He's struggled with injuries in his career, and the Ravens actually pursued him prior to drafting Mark Andrews, and that's Trey Burton of the formerly of the Indianapolis Colts, formerly of the Eagles. I think he spent a time with the Bears right after the Eagles won the Super Bowl. But he's another guy who, like I said, when healthy, not only is he a good receiving option, he's a guy that's gotten in and mixed in the backfield too, as far as getting some carries in the backfield with Indianapolis. And he can kind of be used in that Travis Kelce-esque role, albeit in a limited capacity, like he struggled with injuries. And he's always been a really good number 2 tight end. I know a lot of people expected him to ascend to number 1 status when he left Philadelphia after they won a Super Bowl in 2017, and he just never caught injuries. Injuries really kind of prevented him from ascending to that status. But I think a guy like that the history of injuries but can still be productive in a limited role will be perfectly suited for the Ravens' number 3 tight end spot.
Okay, smaller guy, obviously, so he's not an inline guy, and we've talked about that. Do the Ravens need that? No, not absolutely, but they do like their guys to block. Does not have that great length you like out of a tight end to block in level 2 or 3. Not that he couldn't do it, but at 6'2", 238, he's a little smallish. The Ravens have other practice squad options who would be similar. And just to take the other side of this, because I know you're presenting a guy you like a lot, and I appreciate that. But I'm not a big Burton fan because his catch rate has been under 60% the last 2 years. Now, admittedly, not great situations. Mitch Trubisky throwing to him, and then a variety of Indianapolis quarterbacks, obviously, but including Rivers last year. And, his yards per target have dipped under 5 for the last 2 years combined. I can't see a big investment in a 30-year-old player. And it wouldn't be big. It'd be probably the vet minimum. But I don't know that on a team that's really contending for a champion that I want a player like Burton around at this point.
I mean, yeah, I'm not begging for a table for them to break the bank for him by any means. It's more like the guys that I'm mentioning were like bargain guys you can get,
sure.
Guys you get for the cheap to fill a specific yet limited role. And a guy like Burton, the Ravens liked him a couple years ago. So if it gets to the point where hey, you want to come in here, we got a role for you if you want to fill it. I'm not sure if he want to go back to Indianapolis and sit behind Mo Alley Cox and Jack Doyle again. So I think being the number 3 tight end in Baltimore is better than being the number 3 tight end in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, and by the way, I really appreciate you coming to the show with a number of the cheaper guys on the list. That's one of the things we really want to focus on. This is who's the middle class that you can get to down pretty close to a vet min contract this offseason, when there ought to be some bone picking, I think, frankly, in the UFAs with all of the teams so cap constrained. And then who were some of the other players who you really want to avoid them because at any dollar amount above the vet min, they just aren't a value relative to what you could get at the vet minimum if you wait. And so hopefully that's a component of what we're looking at today. Appreciate you coming up with some cheaper options for us. Tyler Eifert, been around the league for a long time. He's on your list. Well, tell us about your thoughts about him.
Yeah, Tyler Eifert, and I wouldn't say similar to Trey Burton, but just a guy who's has struggled with injuries throughout his career. But he played pretty decent in a limited role with the Jags last year, and they started his career with the Bengals. But like I said, he had that same kind of production. I'm gonna always refer back to this in this conversation that Peyton Hurst had in 2019, and that pass catching role from a pass catching aspect, 36 receptions, 349 yards, 2 touchdowns. It's just like a nice compliment to Mark Andrews, take some of the pressure off of him.
I get you on that. Another guy under 6 yards per target. I'm not real excited from that perspective, but he had a lot more targets than Hurst did in 2020 to get that reception total. And I think Hurst actually was around 22 in 2019, 22 receptions. I may have it wrong.
I have it pulled up right here. He had 30 receptions.
30 receptions. 30 of 38, was it?
39 targets, 30 receptions.
Okay. All right. So that's excellent. That's 77%. But the it's a big difference from 60% is, I guess, my point. So the yards per target don't end up looking that good when you don't have that. But Tyler Eifert, earlier in his career, was a hell of a yards per target guy with 5 straight years between 12.3 and 8.3 yards per target. That's a great run for a tight end.
On March 19th, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier arrive on Disney+.
The world is upside down. We can't lose this fight, Bucky. If we do this, we're going to do it our own way.
Experience the 6-episode event.
Work partners, co-workers. Not necessarily the team. No. We look damn good.
Marvel Studios' The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, streaming March 19th, exclusively on Disney+.
At T-Mobile, we believe in putting people first by treating them right. So we're upping the benefits without upping the price. Introducing Magenta Max, now with unlimited premium data that can't slow down based on how much smartphone data you use. Plus, get Netflix on us. Right now, pay zero cost to switch. And bring your phone, we'll pay it off up to $650. Only at T-Mobile.
Activate up to 4K or video streams at 480p. Up to 40 gigs high-speed tethering. $650 via virtual prepaid card. Allow 15 days. SIM and support charges waived. Receive Netflix standard with 2 lines.
And certainly something that could be considered. At this point, honestly, my feeling would be he's a vet min guy, and I'm afraid that there's another team who is still willing to kind of pay for the name maybe a year or two too late on him. But he fits the Ravens' perspective in some ways, being 6'6", 255, a guy who can contribute in level 2 and 3 on the run block, even though he's not known as an inline blocker.
Yeah, outside of Everett, I feel like, I mean, in Henry, of course, but I just don't view him as a realistic option. I feel like none of these guys can really be that vertical threat that Hayden Hurst was in 2019. Because there were times where Hayden Hurst would just be either wide open down the seam and Lamar would hit him, or sometimes he'd be like, I think in the playoff game against Tennessee, he was open and just jumping up and down like, I'm open, because that guy is like deceptively fast, and like I said, the Ravens really missed him last year, and it really reflected in both in Lamar stats and Mark Andrews stats.
Really showed up the last 2 years for the Ravens. Actually, really the last 3. I mean, I'm thinking back to Mark Andrews in 2018, had an amazing yards per target year. But the Ravens play action game creates tons of yak opportunities. So you don't want an aircraft carrier tight end. Okay, that's the wrong way to put it. You don't want a steam engine tight end in the middle of the field. You want a guy who's got a bigger, heavier motor on him, even if he's got some size. And it really, Andrews has that. Eifert had that at one point in his career, but maybe that's the guy the Ravens need, is another Hurst type who would, and certainly obviously if they had Hayden Hurst, it'd be exciting again, but who can get open and play action in the zone defenses that usually get played against the Ravens. And when the other team bites on that play action, he has a big yak opportunity.
Yeah, that 13 personnel was just so killer for the Ravens in 2019.
Sure was.
And the thing that was so beautiful about it, I was trying to explain it to my wife in like layman's terms earlier today. And I was like, babe, what you don't understand is the Ravens are so unpredictable on offense that year. You couldn't tell what they were doing, whether they were running or passing, just because of, they had sometimes two or three of those guys on the field, and they could either be running a power or they could be running it, like I said, play action, and you'd have Hayden Hurst streaking down the middle of the field, and it was just a beautiful thing to watch, and I really want that for them again.
Yeah, very difficult. I mean, the big thing, 13 personnel, is the defense gets to put their personnel on second. So the offense puts on 11 personnel. Well, the defense has a really easy decision to make then. They're generally always going to put on a nickel. They might, in some weird situations, depending upon who your third receiver is in the slot, put in a big nickel. But most of the time, it's just a nickel situation. If you put on 13, they don't know who to put on the field, particularly on an early down. They don't know how you're going to use that extra tight end. If you have tight ends that are furthermore versatile, it makes it very difficult for them. So it creates a matchup nightmare for opposing defensive coordinators. Something we mentioned, I know, on this show before, but always something I tend to repeat when this topic comes up. But yeah, you're right. I mean, 13 personnel. So it would be great for the Ravens to get that. That's a lot of what I want out of them at tight end this year, is to find another guy who is a really reliable catcher to fulfill what they missed in 2020.
Yeah, same here.
All right, Jacob Hollister always comes up when we talk tight ends in terms of his availability, and I think mostly because he's a cheap option on a team that has other options at tight end. Yeah,
he's on my list too. And like I said, he's a guy that's been a nice nice outlet receiver for Russell Wilson, especially when they've had injuries to Will Dissly and Greg Olsen, last year. And like he's just been like Mr. Reliable for Russell Wilson. Like he doesn't have a great yards per target, but he's a guy that's like really been a nice safety valve option. And I think when he has gone vertical, he has made plays in their offense. They don't ask that much of him. A lot of times when they go vertical, it's either to Metcalf or to Lockett or to even David Moore. So I think his yards per target was more of a reflection. His low yards per target were more of a reflection on his utilization as far as not going down the seam or getting vertical, more so than it was an indication that he couldn't do those things.
Right. He's certainly not a big yards after the catch guy. He's going to secure the football, you hope, and create some first downs for you, but not necessarily create big yak opportunities. So he might not be the guy. And I know there are a lot of people that were excited about getting him at midseason last year because he's one of the only available guys. But you mentioned it yourself in terms of the yards per target at 5.7 career. I just can't get excited about that.
Yeah, he's more of a chain mover than a seam stretcher, and the Ravens need more of a seam stretcher than a chain mover. You got a chain mover and a seam stretcher, Mark Andrews, and they're probably gonna get another possession receiver, either in free agency or in the draft.
So if you're detecting so far that I'm kind of negative on the guys that are out there, I think you're probably right. There's a couple guys at the top end like Henry who are just priced out. There's maybe a couple of older mid-range guys who maybe they work out. A Kyle Rudolph might fall into that category. The one young guy that I really like, and I don't know if it's a possibility of happening, is Jonnu Smith, who they've had some difficulty covering for the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, I love Jonnu Smith. I've loved him since I think Delaney Walker's last year with the team, and I was like, man, who is this 81? This dude is nice. And I really love his game, and it's almost similar to Andrews in a sense. And I'm like, man, those guys, if the Ravens were able to get those two guys together, whew, that'd be nice to see. And like I said, he's I wouldn't call him an excellent blocker, but he's a more than willing blocker, and he can be proficient at it at times. But definitely as a pass catching threat, he can be that seam stretching dude, and he can also make some of those tough catches over the middle too.
Yeah, he's a player that I've had a Titans friend on the show who's decried his pass blocking fairly significant. And that's something the Ravens really require out of their tight ends to a great degree. They don't spend a lot of time with set blockers at tight end. They really rarely play max protect with two guys kept in with Jackson. Jackson does a lot with his legs to manipulate defenses. So maybe he would do better for a team like the Ravens, where doesn't have responsibilities as a pass blocker, as a run blocker. He can still make a contribution in level 2 and 3 by having that decent quickness to get out there and get his hands on somebody.
Yeah, definitely. Especially now that Mark Andrews has been taking more of a role as a blocker, that you rely on that third tight end less as a blocker, and he could just be like that number 3 guy to just off the line and just start stretching the seam.
Yeah, it's the reason the Ravens might not get Jonnu Smith. He played a lot of snaps last year for Tennessee. I think it would be kind of doubtful that he'd want to come to the Ravens, where he'd be the number 3 tight end behind Boyle and Andrews. So I don't think it's particularly a reasonable option. I also think there's another team that's going to be willing to pay more for exactly that reason.
Yeah, I think the contract that we see Jonnu Smith get this offseason might, I wouldn't say set the table, be similar to what Mark Andrews might get next offseason. Or honestly, I think if Mark Andrews gets extended this offseason, I think he's going to get something a tier below the George Kittles and the Travis Kelce's and the Darren Wallers of the world. But I also think that he might be on par or a little bit more higher value than Jonnu Smith. But I think Jonnu Smith is going to not be in the Ravens' price range this offseason.
Mm-hmm. All right, I got one more kind of name that I'm real interested in on my list. You have anybody else who you're hot on?
So I wasn't to begin with because I didn't think he'd be in the Ravens' price range. He's more of a notable name that a lot of people aren't, like realistically believe the Ravens could land. But a guy like Jared Cook, when I was looking back at the in numbers from last year, he only started 5 of the 15 games. He was really kind of rotating in there with the rookie they had, Adam Troutman, from I believe Dayton. It was. He ended up having the most receiving yards of their tight end group. But the more they instituted Troutman in their offense, the less Cook was the featured guy, and if they could get him to come in. He only had I think 500 something yards. So it was more than Hayden Hurst had in 2019, but still he's an aging veteran, and he may not garner as much interest as I'm thinking he might garner in an open market at 33 years old. But if he wanted to come to the Ravens and contend for a championship for at least one more year, then why not?
I think that'd have to be a vet min deal for me at this point. We're talking about a player who's played a fair number of snaps last year, so I doubt he'd really be that interested in coming to the Ravens. But he's played over 500 snaps now for a long time. But more than that, he'll be 34 next month. And for a tight end, that's awfully old. Now, it's not like the Ravens haven't done it before. They went out and got Ben Watson.
Yeah.
Yeah. How old? I don't know how old Coates was when he came to the Ravens, but he was an old guy in 2000, Ben Coates, who retired after that year with the Ravens with 499 career catches. But it's not impossible they go after him. I've got one other guy in my list that I would like, and I like by age, but I doubt he ends up leaving his current situation because it's so perfect for him, is Robert Tonyan of the Green Bay Packers. Now, the big number for him last year for Tonyan was a 91% catch rate, that's off the charts. That's catching 10 out of every 11 balls. I'm going to look up his yards per target here because I don't know it. 9.9 yards per target last year, 9.5 for his career. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with having Rodgers throwing him the football.
Yeah, Robert Tonyan, man, I was so upset when he got snubbed from. I know the Pro Bowl is a popularity contest, but when you got a guy in Evan Ingram who makes it to the Pro Bowl with 1 touchdown over a guy Robert Tonyan who had 10, I just that kind of boggles my mind, and he really broke out for the first time last year, and I don't think there's any way he's leaving Green Bay just because he found his niche there. I really thought Jay Sternberger was going to be the guy for Green Bay as far as pass catching tight end goes, but Robert Tonyan kind of came out of nowhere and caught fire last year. So a guy whose game I really really like and would be perfect for the Ravens in that third tight end role. Like I said, I highly doubt he's getting out of Wisconsin.
Yeah, I don't believe so either. But it's not. I think he's a player where you don't put the tag on him, given the fact he's only produced for 1 year. So I think even though the tight end tag is lower, you mentioned it earlier on this show, I don't think Green Bay would think it was a wise move to put the tag on him if they in fact could afford it. I think they probably just let him walk and get the compensatory pick.
Yeah, I think so too. You kind of don't want to just bank on the dude replicating an outlier of a season because that could just be the outlier.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, he's been a decent player, but this was so much of his production came in this last year. All right. Anybody else we need to talk about on your end?
So he's not exactly a tight end, but I've seen some Ravens fans floating this out on Twitter. But Kyle Juszczyk, familiar face, is going to be on the open market this offseason, and he's a guy that gets kind of utilized what we saw in San Francisco, his role. I mean, he was ascending his last year with the Ravens, but his career really kind of took off when he went to San Francisco. When you saw all the really cool ways that he could be used vertically, I mean, I was just like, man, I knew he had it in him, but I didn't know he had that much in him. And like I said, he's a guy that had taken 19 catches, 200 something yards, 4 touchdowns last year. So I don't think he'd quite fill in that Hayden Hurst role. But the Ravens wanted to go more fullback centric than tight end centric. If you can't find that number 3 guy, then and he wants to sign for I wouldn't say that exactly a vet men, but he's not going to be making that break the bank deal that he had with San Fran where he signed. I think it was like a 4-year, $21 million deal, something crazy like that when he left the Ravens. So a guy I said I saw it floated around in Twitter. I wasn't really the biggest fan of it, but I was like, if he's open to it, and I've seen the guy get vertical, and he's definitely really one hell of a blocker. So I mean, if he wants to do it, then why not?
Yeah, it'd be an interesting move. It'd be a Swiss Army knife type move, which would mean the Ravens would be trying to bring back 13 and some of that diamond formation and whatnot that they've had some success with in 2019. The incredible number for me from Juszczyk is he's now had 4 straight seasons between 7 and 10 yards per target. By the way, 10 yards per target, unheard of for a fullback. Absolutely unheard of. You mentioned some of the vertical ability. Before Kyle Juszczyk came to the Ravens, the longest catch ever by a fullback in Ravens history was 30 yards by Ovi Muhele in the game at Tennessee in 2006. 30-yard late breakaway touchdown. Meaning late was a late off the line of scrimmage on a delayed play. But anyway, he had 3 receptions longer than 30 yards as a Raven, which is astounding as a fullback. And in particular, the way the Ravens would use that. But they'd use it on wheel routes. They'd use it on a lot of different things. And, I could see him being a useful asset in play action and another great player to hide what the hell are you doing with 13 personnel on the field.
Yeah, when I think of Kyle Juszczyk, I don't know if you've seen the highlight of that nasty stiff arm he put on Minka Fitzpatrick when the 49ers played your Steelers, where he pretty much like suplexed the guy with one hand. It was crazy, and I'm just like, man, I missed that guy. But I love Patrick Ricard too. So, but it's just like Patrick Ricard. Like as much as I love Project Pat, he's not the same athlete that Juszczyk is, especially in space.
Yeah, I'd agree. Now, would you see any way the Ravens could carry both?
It depends on how they want to utilize Juszczyk, and like I said, and I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of it, just because I'm like, you want to get younger and you really want to properly replace Hayden Hurst. You don't want to, kind of limit the offense with having 2 fullbacks, even though one is more of a traditional fullback / U-back, H-back, hybrid. But I really prefer them to go out and get a tight end, another pass catching tight end.
All right. And Ravens obviously in pretty good shape in terms of the draft. They could take a tight end, but more importantly, they have 2 guys that spent the entire year on the practice squad who seem like one of them, Breeland or Wolf, might very well make the team this year if the Ravens don't go out and spend a draft pick on a tight end.
I was really high on Jacob Breeland coming into training camp last year. I was like, this is going to be the guy. I watched him in college. Him and Justin Herbert, it was lethal in college, and I was like, if this guy can stay healthy, if he can get on the field, I know he can make an impact for this team. I just knew he was going to be that. I think I predicted he would be one of the keep the undrafted free agent streak alive. I gave him the best odds before, like I said, his injury, it just, he wasn't all the way healed from it. So, but if like I said, if he can come to training camp this year and be fully recovered, and now that he's had I wouldn't say a year of experience under his belt, but a year around the team, a full year to rehab from that injury, and I really think that guy, if they don't, it'll really be telling how they feel about Breeland and his rehab if they don't draft a tight end on higher than I'll say the 4th round in the draft. Like if they draft like a day 3 guy, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round, I still think Breeland has a chance to make the roster.
All right, fair enough. Always a pleasure to have you on, Josh. I appreciate you joining us. Where can people find your work? I'm
at BaltimoreBeatdown.com. That's where you can find me.
All right, and on Twitter?
Josh Reed 907. So it's JOSHREED 907.
Make sure you give him a follow. He's very, very active on Twitter, a lot of back and forth, and always a great football conversation. Thanks again, Josh, for joining us. If other people who want to be on a film study short this offseason, I always have to give people the lowdown on that. Send me an email, filmstudy21@verizon.net, or send something to my Twitter at filmstudyravens, and hit me up with a focused topic that you want. Ideally, I'd like to have 3 bullet points. You don't even have to do that. And we'll have a discussion about it and how to shape it into something that'd be focused and interesting for listeners. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again for coming on, Josh.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film. Powder donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The Name Your Price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.